Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always an honor to speak before the House of Representatives. Great storied history here, just as the Supreme Court has a great storied history. There are some moments in time with regard to the United States Supreme Court which shows it to have consisted of a bastion of strong-willed, determined, principled, constitutionally minded justices. There are other times when the Supreme Court has shown itself to consist of some great judges and some who are more consistent or more interested in politics, more interested in feathering their friends' nests than they are in doing what was right under the Constitution, even though it was easy enough for them to rationalize that, gee, if they did what helped their friends, then obviously that would make it better for the whole country. And I think we get some of that rationalization from this administration. Gee, if they just throw billions or hundreds of billions of dollars at friends, then their friends will do better, and if their friends are doing better, surely the rest of the country would. So we've also found that not to be true with regard to things like Solyndra, and the massive other number of cronies of the administration that have received hundreds of billions of dollars over time, also at a time when this country is sorely hurting from overspending and running up debt. In fact, today we had a bill regarding transportation and a conference report, and I know my friend John Mica from Florida had worked exceedingly hard, as had other members of transportation, trying to reach an agreement with the conference report. It looked like the Senate got the better end of the deal, but I know these people, I know their hearts, and I know they try to do what's right for America when it comes to Chairman Mica and those who are assisting him. But nonetheless, we heard our friends across the aisle over and over today talk about how critically important infrastructure is, how we ought to be spending money, and how just $1 billion added to the transportation budget could really make a tremendous difference. And I hearken back to a year and a half ago when the President of the United States, Barack Obama, had told people that if you'll give me basically $1 trillion, whether it's 900, apparently it looked like more like $1 trillion the time it's finished, you just hand me over $1 trillion and we'll get this economy going. If you don't give it to me, then it will turn out that we may see as high as 8.5% unemployment. But if you do give it to me, we'll never see 8. And of course, he was wrong that we would never see 8% unemployment. We'd gone for many months. I guess that was 3.5 years ago now that he was telling us about his big stimulus. How quickly time flies. But as the transportation proponents were pushing their bill today and talking about the good infrastructure will do, many of us believed that was true back in January of 2009, that it would be good if we're going to spend money on anything, spend it on the things that we really need to do, bridges, roads, all these things that need assistance, need construction, need renovation. So the president sold America largely on his stimulus because we're going to fix all the infrastructure in America. But the last 3.5 years have borne out that the president did not spend $800–900 billion on infrastructure. He spent maybe 6% of the largest giveaway in American history. He surpassed the terrible mistake that TARP was, $700 billion, and we hadn't been able to get an exact number, but of the $700 billion, it's my understanding, it may have been around $450 billion or so that his administration inherited. So when you get the $800–900 billion trillion stimulus giveaway, porculus as some called it, and you combine that with $450–500 billion that he was able to inherit from the TARP fund, and you think maybe $1–1.5 trillion he had to give away, and we hear debate over what difference $1 billion would make. Not $1 billion. He was talking about 1,000 times that for infrastructure, and he spent a tiny fraction on infrastructure, preferring instead to have massive grants and giveaways to programs that were his cronies, his pets, that are now producing no dividends and in fact are increasing further debt. So we hear those things, how wonderful infrastructure would be, and yet we know when we've provided this administration, as a Congress, we provided them with massive amounts of money for infrastructure. They diverted it. They did more damage to the country than they did good. And we look at the people that this president has surrounded himself with. He had a Solicitor General named Elena Kagan. Solicitor General's job is to assist the White House, assist the administration with potential legislation that may come to litigation, assist them with litigation. But when you, as I know from my work 30 years ago in the private sector, you can't advise people about existing litigation and do your job without advising them about the way to avoid future litigation problems that you run into. So we know that the biggest legislative agenda item for this administration was the complete takeover of health care. And as most thinking people would understand, if you can control all health care, you can pretty well control all people. You get to decide who gets what treatments, who can have a new hip, who can have a new knee, who can have radiation therapy, who can have the surgery. And as one secretary in my hometown pointed out, her mother acquired breast cancer in England, and since the English government's wonderful health care system decided how long you had to wait before you could get to have diagnostic tests done, before you could have therapeutic activity occur. Her mother didn't get the diagnostic tests in time to find out she had it for sure, didn't get the surgery in time, didn't get the treatment in time, and she said, my mother died of breast cancer because she lived in England and the government was in charge of health care. She said, I've been found to have cancer since I've been here in the U.S., and because the government was not in charge of my health care, I got it diagnosed in time, I got treatment in time, I didn't have to live by any preconceived requirements of the government. So I'm alive because I was in America, my mother's dead because her health care was in England. Well, Some think the great panacea is government being in charge of health care. We've heard over and over, this is for the good of the children. And we have some children on the floor of the House right now, and I'd be glad to recognize my friend from Kentucky, Mr. Jeff Davis. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought this was the note I got. But yes, I'd be delighted to yield to my friend.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding me some time. Mr. Speaker, I'm very honored today to commend the United Way on 125 years of serving our country. In particular, the United Way of Southeastern Michigan has done so much good for our region and for our people. It's helped provide shelter to the homeless, provide education to our young people, and training to the unemployed. So again, I want to thank the United Way of Southeastern Michigan for its service and also for the United Way on its 125th anniversary of outstanding work to our country. Thank you so much, and I yield my time back to the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. And greatly appreciate my friend Mr. Clark. And obviously that is an important announcement. I didn't realize United Way had been around 125 years. But they have been doing great work, and I appreciate my friend, and I do mean that, my friend, calling that to our attention. The administration had an agenda item, getting Obamacare passed. Elena Kagan was Solicitor General, and she continued to be Solicitor General even up until after the time when the first lawsuits were filed against Obamacare. Now, she gave testimony before the Senate that satisfied them at the time that she was pure as the driven snow, and she would in no way ever compromise integrity. That was the feeling that was gotten. She got the vote she needed to be confirmed, and then went on to the U.S. Supreme Court. But since that time, more questions have arisen. Wait a minute. Wait, she was there during this, that, and the other. When Obamacare was being drafted, when it was being prepared, and even after it passed and it became law, she was the Solicitor General. And so now that we see all these things in perspective, we go, wait a minute, could she have been the worst Solicitor General in American history? That she would never advise the president, her boss, never advise him on the litigation that would surely be coming when his prize legislation got passed, if it got passed? Because a legitimate lawyer, an advisor, a counselor, will tell the client, in this case the president, look, if you want to have this pass constitutional muster, here's what you need to do. Let's get this verbiage in one place, let's get this in another. You know, could she have foreseen that perhaps a weakness of the brilliant John Roberts would be if you call something a penalty in a bill and then later call it a tax after it's passed, then maybe the Supreme Court would buy it. I don't even think that Solicitor General Kagan could have foreseen that John Roberts would totally abandon intellectual consistency. No matter how intelligent, I don't think she could have seen that coming. I certainly didn't. But the law regarding judges, federal judges, is not just a matter of ethics, that, gee, you can have an ethics complaint filed against you as you can if you're a practicing attorney or a judge. The law is 28 U.S.C. Section 455, and it says any justice, judge, or magistrate judge of the United States shall disqualify himself, that's generic for him and her, in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Well, it is absolutely clear that her impartiality is certainly questionable in her boss's most prized legislation, Obamacare. And I see that we have a message, and I would yield to the Speaker.
Thank you. The Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed to the conference report accompanying H.R. 4348, an act to authorize funds for federal aid, highways, highway safety programs, and transit programs, and for other purposes.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my friend from Alabama, one of the great senators over at the other end of the hall, Jeff Sessions, had extended 8 questions to Attorney General Holder, asking for answers, and they were submitted timely under the rules so that they were part of the hearing and would require answers from our Attorney General Holder. And 3 of them in particular were these. And these are questions to Attorney General Holder because as 28 U.S.C. Section 455 is the law, and Justice Kagan's impartiality has reasonably been questioned, there's potential here for a law violation by Justice Kagan, and we need to know more. And since this is with regard to the law that the Attorney General is supposed to uphold, fair questions. Quote from Jeff Sessions to Attorney General Holder. Are you aware of any instances during Justice Kagan's tenure as Solicitor General of the United States in which information related to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act and/or litigation thereto was relayed or provided to her? Unquote. Another question from U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions to Attorney General Holder that required an answer. Quote, when did your staff begin removing Solicitor General Kagan from meetings in this matter? On what basis did you take this action? In what other matters was such action taken? Unquote. Because clearly, Solicitor General Kagan was on the email list for people that were talking about the laws that were coming up that the administration wanted to get passed, including Obamacare. So it's a legitimate question to know at what point did she stop getting emails regarding Obamacare. It's also important to know what she said in those emails, because the one email they slipped and let us get a glimpse of was when Obamacare passed. She sent an email, something along the lines of, can you believe they got the votes? Sounds like an excited utterance. And it's worth noting that under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, the law is very clear. This is the law. It's not an ethics, an encouraged rule. This is the law. Where he or she has served in government employment, as Solicitor General Kagan had, and in such capacity participated as a counsel, advisor, or material witness concerning the proceeding, or expressed an opinion concerning the merits of the particular case in controversy, she shall disqualify herself. So clearly, she's already disqualified because her impartiality has certainly reasonably been questioned. But is there even another law, not rule, but law, in which her impartiality can be questioned? But it makes it very clear, if she ever expressed an opinion concerning the merits of Obamacare, she should not have been allowed to sit on this case. And I think history is going to judge this case in a way that Justice Roberts never dreamed. He is so brilliant. There's no question that he was able to rationalize that coming as part of the majority as he did was the thing to do. And he has gotten accolades, just as Chief Justice Taney did. When he came out with the Dred Scott decision, Justice Taney got accolades from people, you know, wow. Yes, he got criticism, just as Chief Justice Roberts has. But he got some of the same accolades he's got. Wow, what a brilliant man. He's removed politics from the Supreme Court when the truth is just the opposite occurred. The politics of the White House prevailed. It was pure politics. It was nothing but politics. And anyone who honestly reads this opinion from an entirely objective standpoint will not be able to say this is a beautiful piece of well-reasoned legal logic, because it is not. It is a hodgepodge of poorly written, poorly thought out, poorly pieced together opinion, and it's an embarrassment. And one day history will record that this court was possessed of 4 individuals who had political agendas and could not set them aside, and that a Chief Justice who knew better decided he would try to make the court look less than political, and in doing so became very political. We need answers to these questions. The third one was, did you ever have a conversation with Justice Kagan regarding her recusal from the matters before the Supreme Court related to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act? So please describe the circumstances and substance of those conversations. Real easy. Now, we know that this Attorney General has significant recollection problems. He recalled under penalty of perjury before our Judiciary Committee that he had only learned about Fast and Furious a few weeks, he said, a few weeks before the hearing. Within months, we found documentation showing that that was a lie. It had been months before, at a minimum, that he had learned. And then when he had that presented to him, he said, a few weeks, months, what's the difference? Highest justice official in America sees no difference between a few weeks and months. These questions need to be answered. It's already embarrassing enough that a justice hid behind the refusal to answer questions, the avoidance of questions, to be able to sit on this case and participate in one of the worst thought out and thought through and expressed opinions that I've read from the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's worth looking at some of them. If you go to the opinion itself, first of all, the Supreme Court has to deal with the issue of whether the Supreme Court can consider the case. Because the Anti-Injunction Act basically, in essence, says if Congress passes a tax, then the Supreme Court does not have any jurisdiction to consider the case. No one can file such case in federal court until the tax is actually levied and the individual filing suit is actually had it levied on them. Then that individual has standing, can file a lawsuit, the Supreme Court can consider it. So until the Supreme Court could decide and determine whether or not the penalty for not buying health care insurance was a penalty or a tax, even though the language in the Act clearly said it was a penalty, well, the court couldn't go forward. So that was the first thing they had to wrestle with. And you see it particularly highlighted from pages 11 through 15. But it's worth noting, this is page 11, the court says before turning to the merits, we need to be sure we have authority to do so. That's Justice Roberts. Before turning to the merits, we've got to be sure we have authority. He says the Anti-Injunction Act provides no suit for the purpose of restraining the assessment or collection of any tax shall be maintained in any court by any person, whether or not such person is the person against whom such tax was assessed. Can't bring the lawsuit. Supreme Court can't consider it if it's a tax, because it won't be 2014 or so before that happens. So, you look at this decision, page 12, our brilliant Chief Justice, and he really is brilliant. He just compromised it here. Congress's decision to label this exaction a penalty rather than a tax is significant because the Affordable Care Act describes many other exactions it creates as taxes. Because there are taxes. There's the medical device tax that Obamacare adds. All these other devices, all these other taxes, they call themselves taxes. This doesn't. And Justice Roberts points out it's a penalty. They call it that. And Justice Roberts says the Anti-Injunction Act, and this is page 13 of his opinion, the Anti-Injunction Act and the Affordable Care Act, however, are creatures of Congress' own creation. How they relate to each other is up to Congress and the best evidence of Congress's intent. Yet that best evidence of Congress's intent is the statutory text. And that's why he goes through and says the text calls it a penalty. On page 15, he says the Affordable Care Act does not require that the penalty for failing to comply with the individual mandate be treated as a tax for purposes of the Anti-Injunction Act. The Anti-Injunction Act, therefore, does not apply to this suit, and we may proceed with the merits. It's not a tax, it's a penalty. All right, so page 15, all this legal reasoning, it's not a tax, it's a penalty. Best evidence of what it is what Congress calls it. Congress calls it a penalty, ergo, it's a penalty, and we can move on, and now we're entitled to consider the merits. Now, he also adds, this is over at page 39, the joint dissenters argue that we cannot uphold Section 5000A as a tax because Congress did not frame it as such. You know, in fact, the four intellectually honest dissenters had pointing out to the Chief Justice, wait a minute, they called it a penalty. You said the best evidence of what it was what Congress called it. Congress calls it a penalty. They treat it as a penalty, and that's the best evidence. So you can't uphold 5000A as a tax because it was not intended to be one. And if you look, page 39, page 39 is where, and this is the full sentence says, an example may illustrate why labels should not control here. This is the Chief Justice saying these lines. Labels should not control here. He just said in page 11 through 15, labels should control. Congress puts the label on what they mean it to be. That should control. Now he's saying labels don't control here. He goes on to say, and this is at page 44, the Affordable Care Act's requirement that certain individuals pay a financial penalty for not obtaining health insurance may reasonably be characterized as a tax. I called it a penalty so I'd have jurisdiction to write this opinion, but now that I have jurisdiction to write this opinion, now page 44, I'm calling it a tax. Also on 44, he says, the statute reads more naturally as a command to buy insurance than as a tax, and I would uphold it as a command if the Constitution allowed it. Well, that as I pointed out yesterday, that is really strange in an opinion because that's in a paragraph marked capital D. It starts by Justice Ginsburg questions the necessity of rejecting the government's commerce power. Well, you never put that in a, you're not supposed to. In good writing of judicial opinions, you don't put that in a majority opinion. You don't attack another co-majority signer, and yet he does that a few times in his majority opinion. But then to add first person, the first person pronoun I, and then follow that with a conditional future tense verb would, uphold it as a command if the Constitution allowed it. I mean, why is that there? That looks like that should have been part of a dissenting opinion, not, for heaven's sake, the majority opinion by one of the smartest lawyers in the country. He sacrificed not only his intellectual consistency, he sacrificed his intellectual ability to write as one of the best writers we've ever had. It's really tragic. But the statute reads more naturally as commanded by insurance. I would have allowed it. Makes no sense there in that context. One other quote we have down here is found at page 57. He says, "We are confident that Congress would have wanted to preserve the rest of the act." He knows that's not true. He knows that the House version of Obamacare had the severability clause. And the severability clause, every good lawyer, even every bad lawyer knows, if you want the whole document to be preserved, even if one line is struck out, you better put that Mother Hubbard clause in there so that it's all protected. You lose one line, you don't lose the whole document. And that was in the House version, but the Senate chose to strike it out. They didn't want it in there to say, if any of these parts get struck down by the court, it all has to fall. They didn't want. They wanted the bill without the severability clause, because if anything got struck, everything had to go. That's the way they looked at it. In fact, that debate was even made. If we don't get this part, if we don't get that part, then there's no sense even having any of it. Well, it's pretty tragic. Pretty tragic. But there's been so much sacrifice. I'm very grateful to Justice Kennedy, Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, Justice Alito for maintaining their consistency. The dissent is very well written, very consistent. They not only didn't sacrifice their intellectual integrity, they did not compromise their writing ability. It's a dangerous time. And now we know, because of this Supreme Court decision, talking to my friend Alan West this morning, he brought this up. I didn't know he brought it up already in an interview. But since we now know that bringing down the cost of government function is a legitimate interest that justifies intrusive legislation, and you can now have a tax on people if they don't participate, then we know everywhere that concealed guns have been made legal, the crime rates have gone down.
Gentleman's time's expired.
When the crime rates go down, the costs go down. So we need a bill that will require everybody in America to buy a gun, and if you don't, you'll be taxed. And this Supreme Court, and their intellectual lack of integrity, will sustain that bill. With that, I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a policy in my office that every time anyone from my district actually comes to the Capitol, they have a right to see me and talk to me, especially young people. And I have, over the years, seen hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of young people from my home district in Southern California. And I let them talk to me and ask any questions that they would like to ask. And, you know, I have a question that I always ask them. And I thought it would be interesting for my colleagues and perhaps any of those who are watching C-SPAN or reading this in the Congressional Record to know that the answer that I get from when I ask a question of the young high school students from my district. Mr. Speaker, when our kids come in to my office and are talking to me, I note that I was actually in high school in Southern California 47 years ago. And I always ask the kids, is the air better quality today, or is it worse today than when I was going to high school in Southern California 47 years ago? And 90% of the students over the years who I've asked that question to have had exactly the wrong answer. Their answer is, oh, you were so lucky to live at a time when the air quality in Southern California and around the nation was so good. And it's so terrible that we have to put up today with air quality that's killing us. And they've been told that the air quality when I was in high school was so much better than it is today, which is 180 degrees wrong. But this is a general attitude among today's young people because our young people are being lied to. They are intentionally being given misinformation. Now, their teachers may not be intentionally lying to them, but their teachers may be are given information from scientists and other sources that is an exact lie from people who know that, yes, the air quality back when I went to school, and I go into description about how the air quality was so bad at times we couldn't even go out in the playground. They wouldn't even let us out of the classroom into the onto the sports field because the air was so bad. Today that happens maybe once a year or twice a year in Southern California. Back then it happened once a week at times during the summer and during the school year. So our kids have this view that their generation is being poisoned, and they're willing to accept stringent measures in order to protect the environment that will take away a great deal of the opportunity that they should have in their lives in order to correct this horrible problem that they're told that they've got. Well, when I tell them it's just the opposite, they're so surprised. Well, the truth is our nation's environment is no longer the disaster that it was 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, we did have a problem. 50 years ago, I remember that when my dad was a Marine down in Quantico, when I was a child, I came up here several times, and my dad would say, whatever you do, don't put your finger in the Potomac River, your finger will fall off. Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but it was really bad. We've made tremendous progress over the years in the Potomac River, and I can't help but notice there are people water skiing and sailing and doing and fishing in the Potomac now. Well, we don't live in the same time of 50 years ago. The air today has never been cleaner than at any time in my lifetime. The water has never been cleaner at any time in my lifetime than it is today. And I am hopeful that my children will never have to experience the pollution that was rampant when I was their age. So let's take a look and give credit where credit's due. That progress is, in large part, because of the efforts of the government, well, and the EPA, yes, which came in under President Nixon, and others who have used science to fight for environmental reforms and to improve the quality of life of our people. And while I am thankful, I also would like to heed the warning that President Eisenhower left with us in his farewell address, and I quote, that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite, end of quote. He was warning us about government-funded research becoming so intertwined with public policy and the creation of regulations, it would compromise the integrity of both. Well, in recent years, we've seen political agendas being driven by scientific-sounding claims being used to frighten the general public again and again and again. An unjustified fear has been used, for example, to ban DDT. I remember when I was a kid, I used to run through these clouds of DDT, again when my father was in the military down in North Carolina. And yes, it was killing millions of mosquitoes in North Carolina, but when they banned that DDT, and I seem to remember that it had something to do with the thickness of shells of certain birds. Well, they banned DDT, and because of that, we have had millions of deaths due to malaria in Africa. Millions of young African children who, because they don't have a good diet, succumb to a disease like malaria and die because of it. These children are dead, make no mistake about it, because we were frightened into an irrational position on DDT, banning that, and thus destroying the lives of millions of children in the third world. We've seen alarmism with the population bomb. Remember that in 1968, a book claiming that increasing populations and decreasing agricultural yields would lead to cannibalism and global warfare over scarce resources by the mid-1970s. Yeah, and here we are a long way from the 1970s, and I'm afraid Malthus, 150 years ago, who started this type of scarism, was wrong, wrong, wrong. And there are a lot of scientists, unfortunately, who are right now who are molding themselves after the Malthus mistakes that were made 150 years ago. Today's environmental alarmists use faulty and, in some cases, deceitful computer models to prove that the world is being destroyed one way or the other. Quite often, and the ones they're using in the last 10 years, of course, was the world is being destroyed by man-made carbon emissions. And this is proven by their computer models, even though the Earth has seen significantly higher atmospheric carbon levels many times before, and those were not necessarily bad times for this planet. But those computer models were suggesting because of carbon emissions, we were going to face a catastrophe. And in fact, I remember very well the predictions of 10 and 15 years ago that by now we would have reached a tipping point in the temperature of the world. And it would go, and we'd have reached a temperature about now, and then it would go up and 5 to 10 degrees, a big jump. Well, we haven't seen that big jump. The alarmists, of course, are not interested in when they make mistakes, and they're not really interested in solving real problems. They are part of a coalition that wants to change our way of life. That's their goal. The goal isn't to, with their computerization showing that horrible times are ahead of us unless we change. The idea isn't to stop those horrible times, because those horrible times are just a product of what they put into their computers. And of course, we all know what garbage in, garbage out means. If you put into a computer that you're going to have some kind of disaster, that's what you're going to get out of your computer. But what they have in mind, of course, is they want to change the way of our life, which requires us to acquiesce, or better yet, frighten us into submission. Make no mistake, man-made global warming as a theory is being pushed by people who believe in global government. They have been looking for an excuse for an incredible freedom-busting centralization of power. And this global warming is just the latest in a long line of such scares. Excuse me. This was recently acknowledged by the godfather of global warming, of the global warming theory, a man who over the years has been given such credit for laying the intellectual foundation and the scientific foundation for the theory of man-made global warming. His name is James Lovelock. James Lovelock, however, has changed his mind. James Lovelock now concedes, and after a long time dialogue with Burt Rutan, one of the great engineers of our day, James Lovelock has come around to understand that he was not being totally honest about things when he would accept, and he was accepting information that bolstered his position and rejecting consideration of other information. And he has changed his mind about the real threat that global warming poses to the Earth. Not that there won't be any global warming, but that it has been totally exaggerated by the scientific community, and that he himself played a major role in that exaggeration. Dr. James Lovelock, in an article in the Toronto Sun, which is entitled "Green Drivel Exposed," the godfather of global warming lowers the boom on climate change and the hysteria that we have been hearing over these last few years. I would now like to introduce for the record, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce for the record this article that was just recently in the Toronto Sun, and would like to put this in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Thank you. And for those who are listening or reading this specifically in the congressional record, I'd like to have a quote from that article now, and that article says, "Having observed that global temperatures since the turn of the millennium have not gone up in the way computer-based climate models predicted, Lovelock acknowledged," and here is his quote, "the problem is we don't know what the climate is doing. We thought we knew 20 years ago." You know, the sign of a very intelligent person really is to admit the things that he doesn't know. I mean, I've always said I'm not the smartest guy in the block, but I know what I don't know. And thus, when I'm talking to people, I can have an honest discussion to try to expand my knowledge. We've had too many people claiming that they know it all and that we have to give up our freedom because they know it and they don't even have to engage in a debate with us over the details of something like global warming. Let me note, who has heard the words, "case closed"? I mean, 3 years ago, that's what they were saying here. What does that mean? When you hear people in government and you hear scientists saying, the case is closed, well, that must means there's going to be no further debate on this issue. I've been here as a member of Congress for 24 years. Before that, I served in the White House for 7 years under President Reagan. I have never seen a time when there was such an effort made to cut off debate on an important subject than has been done on global warming. Never have I heard over and over again people being told to shut up and the case is closed. Never have I seen so many research projects canceled because it in some way challenged the theory of global warming. Never have I seen so many scientists fired from their position because they believe that the global warming theory may not be accurate. So what we need to do is make sure that we have an honest discussion of the issue, and when we have, even some of the promoters, some of the people who have been the strongest advocates, like the individual, the doctor I just quoted, has changed their position, if not totally reversed it, at least said, well, we really don't know what we've been advocating for these last few years. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce into the record a letter from an esteemed physicist, Gordon Flux, who is an aerospace, and this is a letter and some communication between this physicist and aerospace pioneer legend Burt Rutan. I would like to put that into the record.
Without objection.
Now, let me read in part what that letter says. During the nuclear winter scare about 25 years ago, we redid Carl Sagan's original calculations to discover that he had carefully chosen the inputs to his climate code to produce the results he wanted. And when we realized that a highly respected physicist would prostitute himself to support his politics, his stature, and his income, we in principle understood all the other scams of the post-World War II era. So you had, as he's quoting there, someone who everyone looked up to in Carl Sagan, and when they realized he was cheating on the information and the analysis, they realized that this was so widespread, it was something to be concerned about. And I continue. From 1946 from 1946 Nobel laureate Hermann Joseph Muller, hiding evidence of a threshold phenomena in human radiation exposure, to Rochelle Carson promoting half-truths about DDT, to the unfounded scares about acid rain and ozone depletion, magnetic fields, global warming and ocean acidification, as well as diesel particulates, and more, we have been victimized by continuous hysteria that has led to disastrous public policies. Far too many scientists and their fellow travelers have supported a grand bilking of American taxpayers for their own selfish and political interests. End of quote. End of quotation from that letter to Bert Rutan from this world-famous physicist. It's clear that our current system, fueled by the horrific waste of borrowed money, isn't working. Perhaps it's time that we acted on President Eisenhower's warning and find a better way to separate research and the creation of regulations. Otherwise, we will find ourselves held truly captive with no access to inexpensive energy or reduced costs for food and access to food and water. And we might find ourselves also with none of our basic freedoms because we've given them away because someone has frightened us into giving away our freedom and giving away the opportunity for a better life for our children. Mr. Speaker, I am someone who's very optimistic about the future. We have great possibilities. There are other people who look to the future and think that the technological revolutions that we have faced are actually of detriment to humankind. People did not live good lives 100 years ago. As I mentioned, my father grew up or was a Marine. Well, before that, he grew up on a dirt-poor farm in North Dakota, as did my mother. And in those days, people lived. Ordinary Americans did not live well. It was a struggle. And the longevity of these people was not that long because of the struggle they were in. We need to make sure that we continue our technological development so that we can have, yes, a clean environment, which I have indicated was a product of the good technology, and yes, the research that came from honest and hardworking scientists and engineers, quite often on a government contract. But we need to make sure that we don't back off, because we know there is a group of people in our society and perhaps around the world who, for some reason, believe that back before the industrial age that people lived better than they live now today. Some of them tried their best to fight modernism. They have declared war, for example, on the internal combustion engine. And that's why this global warming thing, or that was the motive here. The internal combustion engine supposedly is putting out carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide, they believe, is changing the climate of the planet. I told you what I have asked young students who've come into my office. I said, is the air better or worse than it was 50 years ago? Well, I even asked members of Congress, and I ask people all the time, what percentage who buy on to global warming, who are saying they're advocates of global warming caused by mankind, basically the internal combustion engine, what percentage of the Earth's atmosphere is carbon dioxide, is CO2? Now, I hope that everyone who's focusing on these comments now asks themselves what they think is how much CO2 there is, because the CO2 is being blamed for changing the entire climate of the planet. An enormous undertaking to change the climate of the whole planet, so it must be a pretty good part of our environment, of the atmosphere. I have had members of Congress tell me that they believe it's 25%. Some people say 10%, others say 20%. I have never had a member of Congress tell me he come anywhere close. And what it really is, it's not 10 or 20%, it's not 5%, it's not 1%. it's less than 1/10, no, it's less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1%. You got that? It's not just 1%, it's less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1%. And of that, humankind is only responsible for 10% of that CO2. So that makes it so minuscule, it would be like putting a string across a football field, and that was going to create changes in the entire football field. Well, if we buy on that type of, the fact that people are unaware, even at this level, of how small the CO2 impact is, and causes them to buy on to these scare tactics, this is a challenge for those of us here, because that threatens our freedom. It threatens us to be able to have, and our children to have, the opportunities that we had, and that we hope that all Americans and all people throughout the world will have. Let us go back in one thing. I am planning a trip this year across the country, even though the gas prices are pretty high. I'm hopefully going to drive across the country with my children. It's a wonderful thing. What a wonderful vacation. We're going to have 2 weeks to do it, and I'm really looking forward to that. But we need we are going to go in an automobile, and it will cost us. The price of gas is up, and I am not a wealthy man. But we do have this opportunity, and it's a wonderful thing. Well, what about 150 years ago? Did people have an opportunity like this? No. What was the biggest challenge that we faced to the health and safety of people in this country 150 years ago? Or, let's say, just at the beginning of the last century, when we turned from the 19th to the 20th century. Do you know what it was? It was horse manure. Horse manure and horse urine was enveloping our cities and the water, and created health hazards for people, and the flies and the stench. And the internal combustion engine came along and has been a great factor in providing health for the human beings, We got rid of this massive, all over the world, depending on animals, left us with the animal droppings, and it was a threat to our standard, to our health, and also the fact that we couldn't produce a lot of wealth based on animal strength. And we couldn't go on long trips with our families, and we didn't have a good quality of life. But the internal combustion engine provided that for people of the United States and humankind. Now, there's no doubt that we have needed to improve the efficiency of the internal combustion engine, and we have. In Southern California today, and we'll leave with this thought, in Southern California today, when I was a kid, it was so much pollution, although our young people don't know about that today. But today, when they think the air is polluted in Southern California, we have twice as many cars on the road, and we've reduced pollution into the 90s, probably 95%. This is a tremendous accomplishment. And yes, some of the regulations that we have had from the federal government has motivated this change. We need to accept that. But we need to also accept that it is our technological advances, and it has been not canceling out technology for fear of things like CO2, which are not a threat to our health. That's how we have kept America on an upward course, even though we've been dragged down by scare after scare after scare. I remember when we had Meryl Streep come to this Congress and testify about Aller in apples. What happened was, for 2 years, apple farmers went broke throughout the United States. There were millions, not millions, but thousands of families who suffered because their product was not being bought because they were afraid of Aller. What happened to that? Aller was found 2 years later. It was all a scare. There was nothing to it. Same with cranberries. When I was a kid, we couldn't eat cranberries for Thanksgiving. We see these all over. We have the gentleman that I quoted here, that I mentioned, who is the godfather of the global warming theory. He's also someone who, James Lovelock, he's also the man who discovered fluoral hydrocarbons, which gave people the analysis of the ozone hole. Well, guess what? The ozone hole, as we have found out, and as it was mentioned in passing there, the ozone hole was overrated as a threat, and in fact went away, and it's a natural cycle. What we have had on this planet is a natural cycle of weather, of temperatures, and that will continue. And we must, but what's happened is we've had people step forward with trying to create hysteria for their own political ends, to try to frighten people into accepting policies they otherwise would never accept. And so today, I'm hoping that as we celebrate the 4th of July, we again reaffirm that we will never give up our liberty. We will never be frightened out of our liberty by foreigners who threaten us with weapons, and we will not be frightened out of our liberty by people who do not believe in the same type of freedom that we believe in, but are using scare tactics to create hysteria among our people that are phony scare tactics to try to frighten us into giving up our freedom. So on this 4th of July, I hope we all reconfirm that guarantee of our commitment in this nation to freedom, to opportunity for ordinary people, so that ordinary people can live decent lives with liberty and justice, prosperity for all. Thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time.